Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to unpack the fascinating relationship between strict rules, human willpower, and unconditional love. You know, we often tell ourselves that if we just learn the rules well enough, or if we literally just try hard enough, we can be perfectly good people. But as the source material we're digging into today reveals, relying entirely on raw willpower and rigid regulations, it usually leaves us falling completely short. So let's bypass the dry theology for a second and start with a universal, deeply frustrating human experience, one that perfectly sets up our entire exploration today. Have you ever known exactly what the right thing to do was, but you just couldn't bring yourself to actually do it? Or, on the flip side, you knew exactly what you shouldn't do, but you did it anyway? It's a massive, glaring contradiction in human nature. We absolutely love to think we're in total control of ourselves, but our daily actions often tell a completely different story. And historically speaking, this is nothing new. Humans have literally always failed at following rules perfectly. As our source points out, the ancient Israelites are a perfect case study for this. Right after escaping Egypt, they were given the ultimate, definitive set of divine rules, the Ten Commandments, carved by the finger of God himself. But what happened? Almost immediately they broke them. The whole group started worshiping a golden calf. Now, God gave them a second chance with a new set of tablets, but the pattern was permanently set. Just having the rules right in front of you doesn't automatically mean you actually have the capacity to keep them. This brilliantly illustrates the Apostle Paul's agonizing inner tug-of-war. Now, Paul was a highly educated Pharisee who spent years in Jerusalem strictly studying the law. I mean, if anyone knew the rules, it was for sure him. But in the book of Romans, chapter 7, verse 18, he admits something deeply profound. He confessed that he had the fierce willpower to be perfect, but he entirely lacked the ability to actually pull it off. He described having two completely different laws fighting inside him, the desire of his own flesh and the desire to do what was right. He wrote so honestly about the profound bitterness of knowing the good he wanted to do, but continually failing to actually get it done. Paul, who had once been this strict, rule-enforcing Pharisee, a guy who even violently persecuted early Christians just to protect his religious traditions, finally hit a wall. He realized that relying on rigid laws just leads to misery and, honestly, hypocrisy. He realized he needed an external rescue, which he ultimately found in the grace of Jesus. He saw that all his intense studying and obsessive rule-keeping were permanently limited by his own human frailty. So to really wrap our heads around this solution, our source lays out a fascinating three-tier framework. Step 1 is heteronomy, Step 2 is autonomy, and Step 3 is grace and love. Let's climb this ladder to see where we all currently stand. Let's start right at the bottom with level 1, heteronomy, which is essentially fear-based rule following. In organizational management, heteronomy means your behavior is governed entirely by external rules and the fear of punishment. It's the lowest level of discipline, but frankly, it's absolutely necessary. Take the number 500, for example. This represents the 500 new Taiwan dollar fine implemented for not wearing a motorcycle helmet. 20 years ago, almost nobody wore helmets, but the moment the government attached a $500 fine to the law, suddenly, almost everyone started wearing them overnight. People started acting right, but it was purely out of a fear of losing their hard-earned cash. But here's the catch, and the proof that heteronomy is highly limited. If you remove the fear of the penalty, people immediately stop following the rules. The source notes that in more rural areas where the police just aren't actively patrolling, you'll suddenly see roads full of people riding without helmets again. Or think about your workplace. If a company deducts a half hour of pay because you were literally 1 minute late to clock in, you are definitely going to hustle to be on time, but purely out of fear. You aren't doing it because you love the company, you're doing it because you are afraid of the penalty. Okay, now we step up to level 2, autonomy, also known as self-discipline. This is where you follow rules, not out of fear, but because you've actually matured and internalized the values behind them. A great way to test your autonomy is this brilliant driving analogy from the source. Just ask yourself, do you buckle up in the back seat? When you get into a car, the people up front almost always buckle up immediately, because the fines for not doing so are heavy. But what about the back seat? A lot of people treat backseat bolts as basically optional or for reference only, simply because it's harder for police to spot them and hand out a fine. A truly autonomous, self-disciplined person buckles up in the back seat too, because they understand the law is there for their safety, not just to steal their money. But self-discipline still isn't the top of the mountain. The absolute ultimate goal is level 3, grace and love, which is the ultimate law. This highest level completely transcends rule following. Jesus describes this state in Matthew 25, which our source creatively calls an amnesia of good deeds. This is when you give food to the hungry or care for the sick so naturally and out of such pure, selfless love that if someone brings it up to you later, you honestly say, wow, I don't even remember doing that. You aren't keeping a scorecard. You aren't picking and choosing to help only the people you find pleasant. You are simply overflowing with grace. But taking this from theory to practice, that's tough. The source highlights a famous story from Luke chapter 10, where a lawyer challenged Jesus by asking how to inherit eternal life. Now, the lawyer knew the textbook answer, love God and love your neighbor. He got 100% on the written test, but Jesus essentially pointed out the massive gap between passing the written test and actually driving the car in heavy traffic. The source compares this to someone who perfectly aces their written driving exam, but when you put them behind the wheel in a busy, chaotic city, they literally don't even know how to parallel park. To show what driving the car really looks like in the messy real world, Jesus told the ultimate case study, the Good Samaritan. So a man is beaten, robbed, and left for dead on the side of the road. First, a priest and a Levite walk by. Now, these were the ultimate rule followers, the absolute experts who had the highest levels of autonomy and knew all the laws inside out. Yet, they walk right past the dying man. Then a Samaritan walks by. To the traditionalists of that time, Samaritans were despised cultural enemies. They were viewed as completely impure. Yet, it was this despised outsider who actually stepped up and stopped to help. Look at the timeline of the Samaritan's actions here. He didn't just toss a coin at the guy and walk away. He spent minutes physically tending and bandaging the wounds. He used his own expensive oil and wine. He spent his entire afternoon taking the injured man to an inn. And the very next day, he paid the innkeeper 2 denarii out of his own pocket, even promising to cover any future medical expenses. It brilliantly illustrates that transcendent love is a rapid, sustained series of tangible actions and deep sacrifices. It is definitely not just checking a required religious box. When Jesus finished the story, he asked the rule-obsessed lawyer which of the 3 men was a true neighbor to the victim. The lawyer replied, the one who had mercy on him. Now notice what he didn't say. He couldn't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan. He was still so deeply stuck on his rigid, prejudiced rules that the very word choked in his throat. The lawyer had all the rules perfectly memorized, sure, but the Samaritan was the one actually living in grace. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to help you evaluate your own life. Just ask yourself, are you just avoiding speeding tickets because you fear the fines? Are you just doing good deeds so you can mentally check off a box on your own self-discipline chart? Or are you truly striving for that third level, that beautiful amnesia of good deeds, where your actions are driven purely by a spontaneous, transcendent love for the people around you? The rules can only take us so far. Ultimately, it's grace that bridges the gap. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this reframes how you look at your own daily actions.